favorite contestants of all time on Top Chef. She is a New Orleans-based chef, instructor, consultant. You know her as Chef Nini Nguyen. Welcome to Southern Fried Asian.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you because, one, I'm a huge fan of Top Chef, and I always root for the Asian chefs. And then being a Southern Asian myself, if there's an Asian chef from the South, I'm all in. So your appearance on the show is one of my all-time favorite contestants. So thank you for doing this little rinky-dink podcast.
Oh, it's an honor, and we got to represent.
We do have to represent.
And being Asian, and it's very interesting having both backgrounds, especially being a chef, and it's good. And I think people need to know that we exist.
Absolutely. I think when you see an Asian chef, you usually get pigeonholed as an Asian chef, right? Oh, clearly she must cook, pho and banh mi, which is great. Of course you do, but like you can rock a jambalaya, you can rock some gumbo too. You know what I mean? And I think. And we'll actually talk about this because I reached out because of a certain thing on Instagram. But I think that's one of the dilemmas as being a chef from the South, is that if you cook something that's atypical of an Asian chef, it's almost like, what are you doing, right?
Yeah. I really think it's food media and how they pigeonhole people just generally, oh, you're this chef, so like you can only cook this thing. And I think that we need to move past that and know that like people can be way more complex and don't oversimplify someone's background. But also there's, it's one way or the other, because then you also don't want to be disrespectful to a different cuisine that maybe you don't have like heritage connected to. And so I think it's very complicated, especially for like Asian Americans existing here. We don't know, like for me, I grew up in New Orleans my whole life, moved to New York about 9 years ago, and just moved back. And I had never been to Vietnam until I was 28. And so Vietnam was very foreign to me. Yes, I know I am Vietnamese. I eat Vietnamese food. I grew up eating Vietnamese food, but I'm American. Like when you go there, you're American. When you're here, you're Asian. And I know that this is not a unique experience to me. I think a lot of Asian people here in America have to kind of battle this.
Yeah.
And I think media in general kind of it has a tie to it. Like I think on Top Chef, I knew that if I cooked Asian food, it would be better received.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always like hesitancy if I made something. Actually, I lied. I did make like spoon bread with the etouffee sauce, and I won. So
well, and you never like hid the fact that you were a New Orleans chef, right? And I think that's one of the things you mentioned too, that like as an Asian American in the South, it's the whole premise of the podcast. It's like part of the reason I wanted to tell these stories is that, like you said, just to put some visibility, shine a light that like not all Asian people in America are from Chinatown and like San Francisco. You know what I mean? That like, because I think that's where some of the cognitive dissonance comes from. What they don't realize is, some of the best banh mi is in the South, because that's where all the Vietnamese people are, right? Like there's a ton of Vietnamese people in Louisiana, in Houston, and like that's as much Southern cuisine as anything else you may find in the region, right? Yeah. And that's the thing that I think that is tough for people to wrap their heads around. Like I remember I was watching like True Detective a few years ago, and like Woody Harrelson's eating a banh mi, and people were on Twitter were like, what? How is he finding Vietnamese? Like, that's so weird. He's eating Vietnamese sandwich in like the middle of Louisiana. I was like, that's like not weird at all. You know what I mean? Like that's so common down there, but people don't know the stories of our people living in places that are not, like said Chinatown or Little Saigon or something.
Yeah. And that's funny. Now I'm like, I need to see that because I didn't catch that. But I'm actually working on a book right now, and it's a Vietnamese cookbook, Vietnamese American cookbook.
Yeah.
And it is influenced by where I grew up, which is the Gulf Coast. For me, it's like so important. I never thought that I would have like a book or like have a story to really like tie the book in. And I want to celebrate Vietnamese American culture. I think that people don't know it. I think that, we have been kind of like ignored for a while, but I think that we contribute a lot to the culture in America, and it's time that people see it. So like that's the whole like intention behind my book. I want to have like decked out nails. My mom's a manicurist, so many of my aunts have nail salons.
Yeah.
And here in New Orleans, you know, the seafood industry is such a big thing. Vietnamese people run the seafood industry here. And so I want to highlight those things. And talking about the banh mi, you know, Vietnamese people gravitated towards New Orleans because of like the familiarity of, you know, having all the French influence, the weather.
The climate is right, yeah.
Yeah, it's like we make like banh mi taste good here because of the humidity. And I think that there's a lot. I can't imagine like almost 50 years ago being a Vietnamese immigrant and like trying to figure it out in America. And I'm thankful, you know, I'm trying now to piece together why, you know, my family decided to settle here and how like my dad's family, which was in Minnesota, how did they find out that like other Vietnamese people were in New Orleans and came before the internet existed?
Well, I wanted to ask you, so like let's rewind the clock a little bit and talk about your origins and how you and your family ended up being, you know, New Orleanians. Is that the term for someone from New Orleans? So you mentioned your dad, I guess, first went to Minnesota, because that's another, a lot of people don't know. I don't do Midwestern fried Asian, but like the Minnesota area has a significant Southeast Asian population as well, which I think, to your point, must have been a shock, because if you're coming from like the tropical climate to like Minnesota, that's probably why your dad went down to New Orleans. Whether or not other Vietnamese were down, it was like, I can't stand the snow anymore.
I know. My dad actually told me, he's like, he remembers the first day he went to America. He's like, they gave us a house and it had a box and it was a TV. He said there was a TV and they handed us a shovel, and he was so puzzled. And they got snowed in. He's like, oh, never seen snow before. And he was just so shocked. I think he was like 9. And I think it's just it's such a sweet like story.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
So how did your family end up particular in New Orleans?
I think that a lot of the church, I guess like church groups really helps facilitate getting refugees over. And my family, my mom's side, they actually like ended up here because a lot of Vietnamese people did, and they settled. They were on the West Bank at first, and then they moved to the East Bank where there was like a big community. There's actually a book written by Nini Nguyen. It's called What We Lost to the Water, that kind of talks about like the neighborhood I grew up in.
Oh, wow.
Down to the building that I grew up in. And so I'm like, you wrote this book about me? No, but
you make a cameo in chapter 5 or something. Right?
But yeah, so there was just a big Vietnamese community, and I guess like people still figured out how to communicate, or like maybe through the different churches, and reconnected with family. And it's very interesting now looking back, like how dynamic Vietnamese people were when coming to America, because not everyone got to come with their entire family. Sometimes, you know, moms with the kids are together, but the dad's like still back in Vietnam, or like a man coming over here trying to, you know, figure it out so that he could bring his family over. And so people really stuck together. I really felt like the community is very strong. It's not so much anymore since the Katrina. A lot of people left, but it's very interesting because then you would see like people who were not married, like coexisting and like kind of co-parenting kids, even if like it's not his kids or her kids, right. Like, you know,
just that sense of community, taking care of one another.
Yeah, or like just like, I don't know, I want to say like having boyfriends or girlfriends that like help you go through like going into a new country and being like, let's figure this out. I know you didn't, you know, birth these kids, but like, can you help me out?
Yeah, no, that's I mean, again, it goes to that sense of like, you know, shared responsibility. So you come along, and as a young, you know, Vietnamese girl, Asian girl, like, did you ever encounter, like, when did you first realize that like not everyone is Asian? Like, when did that, like, did you ever face that, like, you know, period where it's like, oh, you know, you kind of grow up with your family and then you kind of go out in the world and you're like, oh wait, everyone else looks so different and everyone's looking at me funny. Like, is that a thing you went through as a young person?
Surprisingly, no. I think I grew up in an area where it's like predominantly Asian and Black. So like my neighbor next door was like a Black kid who would come over and knock on the door and be like, "Can Nini come out to play?" And it was like very much, I don't know, it's very, what's the word, like integrated here.
Yeah.
You know, especially I would say that with a grain of salt, because it's a lot like class, like, you know, the poor people are here, the rich people are here,
right?
Like in most cities. So I knew I like didn't live in a like Vietnamese bubble. Like I did, you know, I ate Vietnamese food growing up. It wasn't until like I was like 6 that I like knew what chicken nuggets were. And then when my grandma found chicken nuggets, she's like, "This is easy. I just have to put it in the oven." And so that's what she started feeding us. But
right.
I went to school in predominantly Black schools, and there were a lot of other Vietnamese kids. When you asked me that question, I'm like, I don't know why. I just remember in first grade where I had a friend and she was Laotian. And I started speaking to her in Vietnamese, and she's like, "I don't understand you." What do you mean you don't understand me? You look like me. Like, why don't you understand me? And she's like, "I'm from Laos." And I was like, "What's that?" I didn't. So like me not knowing that there were different types of Asians,
right?
Like more of a like, what?
You were the microaggressor, I guess, and that's.
Why don't you understand? I really want to say this to you, but I don't want everyone else in the class to know.
Well, you know, I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I think that's another kind of trope or stereotype that people have of growing up Southern, is that you're just surrounded by rednecks everywhere, and you just like you have to dodge racism like it's a like it's an obstacle course. And you know, like I think that kind of forgets that there are whole populations of people of color, various groups of people. A good example is kind of like the political climate we live in right now, where it's like we just let the red states fend for themselves, and like there's a whole bunch of people you're abandoning if you just like let the red states kind of like fend for themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Having grown up here and then living in New York, I feel like it's so disconnected. Like, especially, you know, they're always like, "Oh yeah, the South is like, they're just so racist." And I'm like, actually, like, no, like, yes, there is racism.
The leaders are racist, but then there's a bunch of us that live down here, you know?
Yeah, but also like there's racism in the Northeast. They think
absolutely.
That, you know, they point the fingers of like, "Oh, the South, you guys are racist." And I'm like, no, y'all are racist too. Y'all just hide it a little bit better.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
And I think that it's just interesting because like I feel like here in New Orleans, and it might be an anomaly, like everyone's a Saints fan, and everyone like kind of intermingles. So it's like it might help because we're all Saints fans.
Yeah. Who dat, by the way, right?
Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know, it's very complicated. And I think that people just simplify, and they have this idea, like they think that like, "Oh yeah, you know, you're from the South, you must have experienced racism." I'm like, I experienced racism in the North too.
Yeah.
You know, in New York, where people think that they're so liberal and like so woke. And I'm just like, it's everywhere. And if you think that like you are not a part of it, like that's
you're actually perpetuating it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very fascinating, and I think people just need to just come with a more open mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So New Orleans, of course, is just an absolute kind of treasure when it comes to like food culture. And having grown up there, you know, it stands to reason one would become a chef. But for your life experience, at what point did you tell yourself, this is what I want to do? Was it when your grandma put the chicken nuggets in the oven? You're like, nah, I need to actually eat real food. Like, what was the like that defining moment that said, I want to pursue this as my living?
So it was after college. I went to LSU after Katrina, and I like partied so much. I had like a degree, but I was just like, what am I doing? I graduated in 2009. And that was when like the market crashed, and I was in like business school doing marketing, and I'm just like, what is this? Like, and all the people in my class, they were making like, I don't know, like $8 an hour in their entry level jobs. And I'm just like, I'm not gonna, like, I make more serving tables than that. And I was just like, I'm like, no, I'm not, if I'm not gonna make money doing whatever I did for my like degree. It's like I got the degree for my family. I'm like, I went to college, I did it, I'm not a doctor, I'm sorry, but I got an education and
You got the thing for the wall. You can hang it up
yeah,
now, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do something for me. So my last year of college, I like went to a bakery and I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to cook. And I don't know why it took me so long to like figure that out
Is
because
it something that you did like all along though? Like as a kid, you helped out in the kitchen, and you just kind of like gravitated towards cooking.
yeah, I would go to the like farmers market before farmers markets were cool. Like it was like really unregulated stuff. Like with my grandma in New Orleans, and we would make like these like elaborate meals from our family and like special like steam buns or like desserts, and I loved it. I enjoyed it, and even in high school, I would bring like pork chops and rice or whatever it is to school and like feed my friends. And if you talk to my friends from high school now, they were like, you were either going to go into like fashion or food. And like we saw that and I did not. And it was because I was like, I want to be rich one day. I got to go to school because I don't want to be struggling. And being a cook doesn't really pay off because you're
Right.
hourly employee. But I was like, you know what? F it. I'm just going to go. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do something I love. And I did. I went to culinary school for like a semester and then I dropped out.
You're like, I already have something to hang on the wall. I just
Yeah,
need the fundamentals, and then I'm
I
good.
was so annoying too. I was like, I don't need a degree because I already have one, but I need to like get my feet wet in this industry. And so then I signed up for school. They made us get jobs while we were in school. And then I was like, why am I paying y'all to teach me how to do the same things that like they're paying me to do?
Right.
And so then I quit and I was just like, I'm going to just work for like interesting chefs, people that I want to learn from. And I think that is like the attitude you should have. I don't think anybody should go to culinary school unless you have the means to, but like no,
Right.
in debt is expensive and you don't make money coming out of culinary school.
Some of the kitchens you've worked in, I mean, it's probably the equivalent of like the things you learn in those kitchens
Yeah.
is the equivalent of what you would learn in a culinary school.
Yeah. And so you're going to learn how to cook no matter what. Like, and if it's, if you don't know where to start, go knock on some restaurant's door and say like, hey, I'm free labor. Can I come and just like peel potatoes and watch you guys? They're never gonna say no. I mean, they might because like HR, like you can't
like child labor laws or some of your.
labor, but
Although I mean, I'm someone who grew up in a restaurant. Like my family ran Chinese restaurants my entire life, and Chinese people have no qualms about like employing children as long as they're blood related, and sometimes even not.
Yeah, no, I'm saying people are like no shame. Like you know what? You're 11. You can hold a knife now.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think coming with the like right mentality and just like eager to learn, it can take you so far. And I'm very thankful that I had that like curiosity in my 20s. And I'm very happy I left. I left New Orleans. I didn't think I was. I didn't like I don't know about like or most Vietnamese parents here are like, you're gonna go to school here, you're gonna like build your family here, you're not gonna leave us.
Right.
Like you need to be very, very close. So my mom cried when I went to New York.
Yeah. I can imagine. They guilt trip you if you do leave until you come back, and now you're back. So
And
I guess it all worked out in the end.
she got what she wanted.
Well, while you were in New York, you caught the eye of the Top Chef producers. What was that process like for that first season in Kentucky when you got cast on the show? Was that something you know, if anyone's kind of like no spoilers, but by the time this podcast airs, I'm sure people will have caught up. But like this season's winner, like was transparently like I was a Top Chef fan my whole life. I didn't want to be an astronaut. I want to be a Top Chef. For you, when you got cast on the show, was it a show you watched? Was it something you were aspiring to do, or was it like just happenstance that you got cast on the show?
So I remember moving to New York and then seeing that they were going to New Orleans. And so I got cable just so I could watch Top Chef because I missed home so much.
All right.
And I think I might have watched seasons before, but because it was in New Orleans, the producers then became friends with some of my friends. And then they threw my name in like for the next season. And so it was like a 4-year process basically for casting. So like sometimes they're like, we want you. Just kidding, we don't want you. And then they're like, we want you now. And I'm like, I don't want to do it because like I was in like a good space. And then they're like, oh, we know you don't want to do it, but like, do you know anybody else? And then I'm like, I want to do it.
Right.
And so it was just like a dance, and we were just like figuring it out. And then so the last year I was like, I'm interested in doing it. I'm only going to apply this last time. If you're not going to pick me, I'm not going to be on it anymore. And I said it a little bit more sassy. And I think they were like, this girl's crazy. Let's get her. But I didn't. It was just an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I was like, how fun would it be? And I started seeing some of my friends who were on it, like Kwame Onwuachi and Danny Espinoza. He was in the Mexico one, and how like it changed their careers. And so I'm like, well, I want that because I don't want to be a broke cook anymore. And so I was like, okay, let's do it. And I did. And when I was on fire, but then I got out.
Right.
And then they invited me again for All Stars, which I think that season really like helped my career. It helped a lot that it was aired during the pandemic, so everybody watched it. And everyone was trying to figure out how to cook. And so I started teaching cooking classes online, and it's like the best thing that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, that's kind of like your main thing now, right? You're like this. You're kind of known as this online show. It's like the Julia Child for a new generation in a sense, right? Like instead of tuning in to PBS, you just go to your Patreon or find your videos on Twitter or YouTube. But just real quick, one of the things I think is super interesting about your Top Chef journey is that there's not many people went back to back. Right, like you were 16 and 17.
Yeah,
you were invited back as an all-star like right away. And what was that like? I mean, because clearly you were a fan favorite.
Yeah.
How was that? Was that like in the cards as soon as you got cut, or was that like a negotiation? Like, we love you and we want you back like the next season.
They were like, we want you back for the next season, and I was not sure because it really messed me up. The first season really. I left, like, I'm like, I don't even know if I know how to cook anymore. And like, I would have nightmares, like PTSD from Restaurant Wars.
Yeah.
I would have nightmares of like Padma and a bunch of people in the room looking at me being like, where's my food? And I have no idea.
That's intimidating watching on television. I can't imagine what it's like being in the Top Chef kitchen. Southern Fried Asian is brought to you by Libsyn.com in more ways than one. Do you have an idea for a great new podcast? You can bring your idea to life and start your podcast today with Libsyn. Southern Fried Asian has been on Libsyn for years, ever since we started the podcast. Libsyn has everything you need to plan, launch, and grow your own podcasts. They provide some of the best resources created by expert podcasters who will show you everything you need to know, like what equipment to use, how to record great audio, how to get your show on platforms like Apple Podcasts and others, and much, much more. And as a friend of the pod, when you sign up with Libsyn, you get your first month of podcast hosting for free. That's right, there's never been a better time than right now to start podcasting. Just go to Libsyn.com, use the code FRIEND, F-R-I-E-N-D, at Libsyn.com. That's Libsyn.com. Use the code FRIEND to get started and create your podcast today. Southern Fried Asian is being sponsored by Athletic Greens. I want to talk to you about Athletic Greens. With one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. Basically all the things. One of the best things about Athletic Greens is that it's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. It also contains less than 1 gram of sugar and no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, and it still tastes good. Athletic Greens uses the best of the best products based on the latest science with constant product iterations and third-party testing. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day, that's it. No need for a million different pills or supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is partnering with Hard Knock Media to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/emerging. That's athleticgreens.com/emerging to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. You're the first Top Chef I've ever spoken to, and I've always wanted to ask someone this. Like, what we see on TV is highly edited, but like, are you guys really in, like, when Padma says you have 4 hours, are you guys like literally in there for 4 hours, like sweating balls? Like, what is that experience like when you're shooting?
Yes. It's very real. And first off, I would say, people are like, oh, they say this or they edit this. I'm like, they don't force you to say anything you don't want to say. So like, I think however you come off on TV is actually your personality, and people like record it. And so that is like, if they're kind of a dick, they're kind of a dick in person.
Right.
But the situations, they are very real. Like, we do have like a little window, so like if we're doing a quick fire challenge, we'll like run and do the challenge, but like they'll stop, they'll pause, and then we'll go over rules. So like everyone is on the same page and understands the challenge. And it's like kind of like, I think, a legal thing, because we have to sign that we understand, and then we like record like raising our hands being like, we understand. And so we have like a few minutes before the challenge to like look and see. Everyone's just like trying to figure out like what they're gonna do, so you can think about it for like 3 minutes and then actually go and do it. And the time constraints are real. Like, there'll be like 3 hours, so you have 3 hours to like make your food, put it on the rack, wrap it and everything, and like have it go. And so those are all things that you need to consider when you decide what dish you're going to make. And
then like for quickfire, like there are producers in the room when Padma says, utensils down. Like, they're watching. And if you're like, try to sprinkle something real quick, they'll catch you. Like, that's not even, wow, that's crazy. Because again, watching, you're just like, what might come out in the edit is that they show you and it looks like you're in the weeds with 3 seconds, and then all of a sudden everything's great. That's probably kind of like a trick in the edit.
Yeah, that's editing.
but even the fact that like, someone is there to kind of catch you if you're trying to like sneak something, that's wild to me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's all like editing. They want to make it like suspenseful.
Sure.
But most of the chefs, like by 2 minutes you're plating. No one's ever like at 30 seconds plating, and because it's not going to be good. They're going to get over it. Like in the last 2 minutes, but that's like editing and the music. They're like, ah. And so I think it makes it, it's still TV. I think people remember that, like when people would attack me on the internet about like restaurant wars, I'm just like, y'all, this is a make-believe situation. And, like, it's TV. Like, I'm sorry that you're so upset that I look so dumb. I'm upset too. But it's TV.
Yeah, at the end of the day. The day. So you come out of the Top Chef experience and like you said, you go smack dab into a pandemic, which is kind of like almost like bookends to your career, because as you said, you started off with a market crash, which definitely affected the restaurant industry. And now we're kind of coming out on the other side of a pandemic, which also kind of tanked the restaurant industry. So like you're kind of at bookends in the sense that like, or it just kind of just shows the terrible dilemma we're in with late stage capitalism. But we're both in a situation where like the traditional route isn't going to cut it.
Yeah.
And is that why you turn to, well, I have a internet connection and a webcam. Let's just do that.
It makes me sound like I'm a cam girl.
But only chefs, I think, is the next thing.
Yeah. No, I think, one, before going to Top Chef, I helped develop a recreational cooking school in Brooklyn, and I really loved it. It
was a cook space, right?
Space, yeah. And so I really loved it. I really liked, developing the recipes that I was going to teach the students, learning about different things, testing like what's the best way to make fried chicken. Like it allowed me the budget and like the space, the time, because I was my own boss, to do that. And it was so rewarding. And I really enjoyed teaching. That was something that I started in like 2013. I started teaching cooking classes just for like extra money in New York. And I've realized that like that is where my passion is. Like I want to teach people how to make foods that I love to eat, but I want to do it with the masses. Like I don't want to just do it for people who could pay, but they did. Like dirt. Sorry, my dog. Tofu.
Is that tofu? The infamous tofu?
He's so mean. Boy. He's too big for me right now to like try to carry up there.
Well, I'm actually was wondering if anyone who follows you on Instagram knows the infamous tofu. So I was wondering if the dog would make a cameo.
Yeah.
But, so do you think like your love of teaching cooking, your career now doing it on camera, like do you feel like the Top Chef experience helped you kind of develop the like how to cook on camera? Because I think that's another thing that is I was someone who grew up on like Jacques Pepin and like Julia Child shows on PBS. Like cooking in front of a camera, I just feel like is a different kind of skill set than just cooking in a kitchen.
Yeah. So when casting, they make sure that you can do that, and they're like constantly bugging you with questions, and it's because nobody just wants to see people just cooking. They want to know what they're cooking, what they're thinking, whatever. And I think that was very helpful. I think having worked in kitchens where I had to train cooks was so helpful for me, because then I had to like verbalize. I'm like, okay, when the pastry cream does this and there's a film on the pot, it's done. It's like, that was not a correct thing. I was out of shoot, but like
good thing is no one's tuning in probably like looking for cooking tips. Although if you have any, I'm sure we can charge an extra little something on the back end. But anyway.
But I think that is a very important skill to have, and like if you want to be on Top Chef or any cooking show, that is a requirement. And so I think that having like trained so many cooks, having been on the show, it really helped me be able to do it, because like there's one thing to be able to teach people how to cook when they're in front of you and we're all tasting it together, but it's another to do it virtually where everyone has different equipment, everyone has different ingredients, so you have to be very nimble and like problem solve a lot. And Top Chef, like that's all you have to do. Like it's less about like how well you can cook, and it's more about how well you can pivot and how well you can problem solve. It's almost like how smart of a chef are you, because there are so many things that can go wrong with all of these challenges, as if you've seen.
Right.
It never always like that challenge went smoothly, never.
But at the same time, they're not gimmicky. Like a lot of cooking competition shows are super gimmicky.
Yeah.
And I feel like what I appreciate about Top Chef is it still kind of honors the cooking, even if there are challenges and there are like, twists and turns, but it's not like, here's a leather shoe and a, like make something out of it,
Yeah, exactly. Tofu. He just really wants to be on this podcast.
He's a ham, I think is what he loves the camera.
He is.
That's why he has his own Instagram account.
Yeah. But yeah, I think it was something that I was like, okay, I'll test this out. And then it really like catapulted, and I don't do them as much anymore now that like the world's opened again. But I have a Patreon, so I do like a weekly recipe for those who like really like having those classes, and I'm trying to explore like what's the next phase for me. But my goal is to be able to teach people how to make delicious foods of all kinds of places or backgrounds, like to the masses, and hopefully free, because I think that food and recipes, and everyone should know how to learn how to cook, and it shouldn't be for people like it should just be readily available for everyone.
And I mean, and that was kind of like the appeal of those early PBS shows, and even like the early Food Network, when it was more kind of those instructional shows than like these competition shows where you have like and that's kind of like, I think watching some of the videos you've posted, it is kind of a throwback to those old like Jacques Pepin. I loved those shows as a kid, like Martin Yan, you know what I mean? Just in a kitchen studio and then talking to the camera and developing a dish.
That's what I want to do. I love that you keep saying Julia Child, because I sold my book to Knopf, which is her publishing house, and I got to choose, like I was lucky enough to be able to choose like who I wanted to work with, and I was like, of course I want to be house like with the same house as Julia Child. And I do. I think that like everyone should learn how to cook, and everyone like because not everyone can travel or like go places because they might not have the means to. But to be, I was such a curious kid and like adventurous eater, and I remember watching like Food Network and all this stuff, and then like having all of those dishes that I never had before and being so curious and trying to recreate that as a kid. My poor parents. I made some really gross things and I'm like, look what I made.
But at least you tried. And that's, I think, the ultimate, you know, that's what says something about what food does and how food can bring cultures together. And I did want to talk before we ended about like, you know, food is also complicated in that it is so tied up into culture. And we know as Asian people, when we see, you know, Asian food be disrespected, or not even disrespected so much as kind of like, I feel like it's weird to talk about food and appropriation because so much of food is about adapting. Yeah. You know, you mentioned your cookbook is about Vietnamese American cuisine, which is, you know, unique and distinct from Vietnamese cuisine. I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Chinese restaurants, but they were Chinese American restaurants. Yeah. And I feel very strongly about respecting Chinese American cuisine as its own cuisine. Because, you know, you hear a lot of people say like, that's the bullshit Chinese, or that's not the real Chinese food. And it's like, no, this is real food that real Chinese people made using ingredients that they found here in America. It doesn't disqualify it from being Chinese food. Yeah. But at the same time, there are examples of people kind of like taking other people's food and kind of passing it off as their own, I guess. Is that the critique? Like what is the issue, do you think, when it comes to like where heritage food and appropriation do kind of intersect, and how do we avoid that as not just chefs, but as like even just appreciators of various cuisines? Because as you said, you know, one of the best experiences of being a chef and being a food connoisseur is to be able to kind of like try so many different styles and different types.
I think that this is it's hard to kind of navigate in this, and it took me a while. Like I had that whole like jambalaya thing. I had a post where people were really upset that I made jambalaya, and they're like, you don't know, and it's, you know, I couldn't help but felt like it's because I was Asian. They're like, you couldn't possibly know. And I'm like, but I think that all in all, it's not the intention that people want. Like, because I get asked this a lot. They're like, how do you feel about like all these white chefs making Asian food? And I think that it's being respectful, not calling something what it's not. You know, I saw someone who made pho with like a different something other than beef and chicken, and I'm like, that's not pho. It's no longer pho. Like you've and knowing
like, what if we use ramen noodles? Then you're making ramen, dude.
Exactly. And it's like, don't call things that it's not. Like, do the due diligence if you're gonna try. If you're, you know, I feel very lucky that I come from a place that that has food that inspires people. Like, it is a compliment, and I want people to like add on to it, but don't misname something, because it means something to me. And if you call this pho and people had it for the first time at your restaurant, then they're going to think that is what pho is, and it's not. And so I think like having that respect and understanding of whatever that dish is before you make your own version is like key. And also knowing that like, no, that is not like traditional, and just like say that, don't think that like you're better, don't think, I don't know, it's a fine line, because I feel very lucky that like I come from New Orleans and I am Vietnamese, so I can pick and choose like where I can get things from. Not always, I guess, because people got really upset, but I think it's just the amount of respect and not calling things what they're not. It could be a whole new thing, and you could just name it a whole new thing.
Like you're inspired by the dish, but you're not. Because I think where a lot of people fall is that it almost comes off as like, I'm improving this like indigenous dish, or I'm improving this ethnic dish. And it's like, you're not. One, because there's no such thing as improving something that's already good. You're making your own version. You're not necessarily improving it, you know?
Yeah. And it's all subjective, you know? It's like, and so I think it's cool. I want people to be inspired by other cuisines. Like how it would be such a boring life for me as a chef if I could only cook what I already knew,
Right.
And when you explore, it's like when I travel, I get so much inspiration because I'll eat new things. I'll eat different things from different cultures, and it's amazing. And it just only makes me more creative, and it energizes me. And so I don't want to be like gatekeeping.
Yeah.
I think that there's room for so much more, that like it's okay. They can make the pho, they can make the banh mi. Maybe they'll make something that I really love that I'm like, damn, I wish I would have thought of that. And so in one hand, I'm just like, I want people to explore and like do things, but then I also want them to be very respectful.
Like I think in so much of like culinary arts, it's like French techniques, Italian techniques are kind of looked at it as almost default. Like that's the fundamental. The fundamental is to cook French style. The fundamentals is to cook Italian food. And then everything else is kind of like everything else is in a box. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, why can't like Vietnamese techniques, Chinese techniques, Southern African American techniques, why can't that be considered like fundamental and build off of, rather than it's kind of like, preserved in amber and unchangeable?
Because of white supremacy.
Exactly. Well, yeah. I mean, it was a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
But absolutely.
But I think that we are at a time now that people are more open-minded. Having done the cooking classes, I've done fundamental classes where I do like knife skills, roasting, very baseline things. But the things that people were more interested in was like Asian techniques, like how Asian people cook, how to use a wok. Like so many people are more open to it. And I think it's because of like the internet and globalization that really has Americans very curious. And I hope that, eventually it will change and everything would be kind of even. I just think that people didn't know it. And now that they do, they're like, holy crap, like this is like a great way to cook and I need to learn how to do it. And so once people, I feel like, have access to it and access to that knowledge, the equipment, it will be another staple.
Yeah.
I think it will take time.
Yeah. And I think that's ultimately the goal, right? Is that, because sometimes I do think, and again, someone who comes from like, Chinese American cuisine background, is it like when I hear people criticizing it, it's almost like you want something that's almost like I said, preserved in amber. And no culinary tradition is tradition for long. Like it's always changing, it's always evolving. And I, in New Orleans is such a perfect example. Like Creole and Cajun is a combination of so many inspirations.
Yeah,
that there was no such thing as like here is the original. Right? Because it's always being built upon. It wouldn't be Creole if it wasn't. It wouldn't be Cajun if it wasn't. So.
Exactly. It's the influence of all the different immigrants that came here. And so, like, even down to our po' boy bread, which is very similar to banh mi bread, you'd think, like, it's French people. No, it's German. The most common bread here is from Leinheimer. Very German name.
Didn't know that.
The sausages, German. The jambalaya, inspired by paella, Spanish. There are so many different things that have contributed to this part. And so that's why I'm like, it's a beautiful city with beautiful regional cuisine because it was a port city and so many people have gone through. And now, like, the latest that has been for like almost like 50 years is Vietnamese people, and how our food has influenced, our farmers have provided for the restaurants here in the city, and how people have banh mi inspired things, pho inspired things on their menu. And so I think that this is a great example. Like, this city is a great example of how food can evolve and coexist and still be respectful.
Yeah.
And I think that there are so many wonderful examples here that like people should take. I think, like, I got a lot of criticism. My friends call it jambalaya gate, for making jambalaya in the style of paella, because I didn't want to overcook the seafood. And people dragged me on the internet, and it like made me think about a lot of things, because I didn't want to perpetuate the same thing that I get upset about when people bastardize Asian food. But yet I still wanted to stand my ground, because I feel like, you know, Vietnamese people are not the oppressors in this community. We came here, we're like, how do we work? What do we need to learn how to do to survive? And cooking seafood and cooking food in this regional cuisine was one of them. Like one of my family members, my aunt had a grocery store, or like we call them corner stores. They're like bodegas, but most of them will serve hot food. And so many Vietnamese people started owning them and kind of teaching each other, like, hey, this is the kind of food people like here. So like learn how to make po' boys, learn how to make gumbo, learn how to make like tomato stewed okra. And so Vietnamese people learn how to make these foods to really adapt.
Right.
And now, like when you go to the seafood shops here, like Cajun seafood and all these boil places, they're all run by Vietnamese people. And so
I mean, Viet Cajun has become its own distinct cuisine in Louisiana.
And so I don't expect like everyone in America to know this because it's not as common, but they will. They're gonna know soon.
Well, and I think it's fundamentally down to the, again, goes back to the central premise of this podcast. It's exposing stories of Asian people, and not just in the South, but in regions that we're not typically associated with. In, to your point, the media kind of like mind, right? Like no one thinks of Asians in the Deep South. No one thinks of Asians in the Gulf Coast. Even though, as you said, for 5 decades, Vietnamese have, and even longer, right? Like there were the Filipino fishermen from like hundreds of years ago who were from the Gulf. So like those stories are the ones we're trying to raise up, and that then, you know, people will associate Vietnamese flavors with Louisiana that they may not, the ones who are not familiar with food may not think of right away. Before we end, and I know we don't have too much time left, I did want to, you know, I promised I would ask you, we talked about how you fell in love with food and became a professional foodie, I guess. Well, but what is one, now you're back in New Orleans, but when you were gone, when you were in New York, when you were on Top Chef in Kentucky and LA, what's the one dish that always brought you back to New Orleans? Like thinking about it, smelling it, maybe preparing it on the side. What was the thing that always brought you back home when you were away?
I feel like I would have to say like my favorite dish growing up. It is braised like mullet roe, so like fish egg sacks. Mullet roe is what like botarga is made of, which is so fancy ingredient. But in like around here, mullet is like very common, and I would have my grandma would make like pork belly, thinly sliced, and she'd braise it with the mullet roe. So it's like caramelized in like sugar and fish sauce and onions and ginger. And it was my favorite thing growing up. And I would want that with like jasmine rice. Like that is to me the most comfort food. And now because mullet roe has become so popular, it's like a delicacy that like usually happens in the summer. And whenever I do something really nice for my grandma, she always seems to find it and she'll make me this dish. It's because I'm her favorite. I'm sorry, all my other cousins are best grandchild.
I mean, that's clear, right? Isn't that, how is that in question?
I'm the golden grandchild and I love to rub it in. So let this be this podcast.
They're not on TV. I mean, come on.
But I think that is to me home childhood, also with pickled mustard greens. Like the eggs, mustard greens, and rice is like my like death row meal.
Nice.
My friends have all heard this like dish and they're like, okay, Nini, we get it.
Well, now everyone knows about the mullet roe. Well, Nini, thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I love talking not only to Southern fried Asians like yourself, but I love talking about food. So this was kind of like my one of my favorite episodes I've done. How can people who want to talk about food and hear from you talking more about food find you on the internet?
You can find me on Instagram, where I'm most active, I guess, at Chef Nini Nguyen, Nguyen. And that same handle for TikTok as well as Twitter, but I'm never on Twitter. And I'm trying to figure out the TikTok situation. I just am too old.
Yeah. I feel like it's passed me by. I don't even understand it. But
yeah.
And then what's the Patreon if people want to sign up for the newsletter?
Yeah, it's also Chef Nini Nguyen.
Awesome. Well, Nini, thank you so much for being on the show. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
It was really nice talking to you, Keith.
Thank you. You can find me, Keith Chow, on Twitter at @TheRealChow, _real_Chow. Follow the podcast at Southern Asians on Twitter and at Southern Fried Asians on Instagram. Go to hardknockmedia.com to find this and all of the podcasts in the Hard Knock Media Network. Subscribe and download Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere you get podcasts. Support us on patreon.com/nerdscolor. Also find us on GoFundMe. As always, Southern Fried Asian is co-produced by Jess Vu. Email us, thenerdscolor@gmail.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/thenerdscolor. And until next time, keep it Southern Fried, y'all.